Okay, 21.2, solving equations by factoring. So lots of review here. We've spent a lot of time on quadratics now, much like we did with linears. So we're going back to that whole unit that I created with where we just factored on or focused on factoring and how to solve. So that's what we're going to do here. Obviously, you can go through and look at the book and kind of go through how the book does it, but we're going to reference what we did in terms of the problems that we had done and how we solved. So I'm going to skip ahead all the way to the your term problem, and it just says factor. Okay, so in this problem, we did it by what we referred to as the bottoms up method. Okay, so bottoms up, remember we multiplied that, and that gives us negative 20. Okay, so we would get x squared plus 8x minus 20. And then we would find our factors of 20 that subtract to give us 8. Remember, you could find the zeros on the calculator. And if you found the zeros and the factors, remember, are opposites of each other. But factors of 20, that would be x plus 10 and x minus 2. Okay, because, again, 10 times negative 2 is negative 20. Positive 10 minus 2 is a positive 8. But then we had to deal with the negative 5. So we would divide by negative 5. Okay, remember it does go into it evenly in the first one, so that becomes x minus 2. It does not divide here, so then that negative 5 has to come out front, and we get negative 5x minus 2. Okay, now we just review here. Do our FOIL. That's negative 5x squared, negative 2x, positive 10x is 8x, negative 2 and negative 2 multiplied gives me positive 4. So those are my two factors. Okay, so I circled this just to remind you, zeros are where it crosses the x-axis, finding the x-intercepts. So you can find the zeros on the calculator doing left bound, right bound. So just a quick review here. You go to second trace. So on your calculator, second trace. And then number 2 is 0. It's going to ask you for left bound, right bound. So in this case, you would put your cursor here for left bound. And then you would put your cursor here, move it down here for right bound. And then on guess, you just press enter. You can move it closer to where it crosses the x-axis here if you want to, but just press enter and then it'll give you that point, okay? Now on the other side, it's a little different, okay? On the other side, you want your cursor here for left bound. So think about moving your cursor on the graph from left to right. So right bound, your cursor would have to be up here. You're always going to sandwich the x-axis because that's where you're finding it. Your 0 is your x-intercept. So your cursors have to be on either side of it. And then just like before for guess, you just press enter, or you can move your cursor closer to the x-axis and then you get that. Okay, now the answer here, if we did it factoring, would be 4/3 because 4/3 is 1.333 repeating. All right, so here's a problem where we look at what we call parabolic flight. And we've talked about this a little bit when we first did quadratics, but this is the equation we use due to gravity. And it's just a standard equation that we know. It's not bad to memorize. You need to know that V is the initial velocity. It's the velocity starting at and towards or upwards. So if you're going in an upward direction, it's a positive. If you're going down, it's a negative direction, or downward, then it's a negative velocity because of the direction it's going in. S is whatever your starting height is. So if you start at the ground, then S is 0. If you start 15 feet up or 5 feet underground, if you're 5 feet underground, then S is a negative. So we're going to use that standard equation negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. How long does it take a rock to hit the ground if thrown off the edge of a 72-foot tall building? So this is our S. It's our starting height with an upward velocity of 24 feet. So upward is positive, so that's my V. So my equation becomes negative 16t squared plus 24t plus 72. And all that is equal to, you're looking for when it hits the ground. So you want your height here to be 0. Okay, so in this case, you can factor, and I'm going to do that here in just a second. But even easier is just to do it on the calculator and find your solutions. Now, what is t referring to? T is referring to time. And we said typically, if it's a quadratic, there are two solutions. But in this case, time can only be positive, so all we want to do is really look at the positive solution. So you could do that on the graph. Now, you can try a table. Sometimes you got to be careful with the table, though, because your time in a word problem may not be an integer. It may be a decimal or fraction. So I'm going to do it by factoring, just to keep reviewing factoring a little bit here. So 0 equals, and we'll deal with all this here in just a second. First thing I do is look for a GCF. I'm going to take out a negative since it leads with a negative, and I think 8 goes into all those. So that's going to be 2t squared minus 3t, because again, a negative times a negative would give me a positive. And then it's going to be minus, let's see, what would that be, 9. Okay. Again, negative, because negative times negative here would give me the positive. Okay, so what's that negative 8 do? Nothing. There's no variable there or anything, so it cannot be a solution. Okay, so we can just ignore that. So now all I need to do is factor this. So I'm going to refer back to the bottoms up method. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. Factors of 18 that subtract. Okay, factors of 18 that subtract to give me negative 3. So that's going to be t minus 6 and t plus 3. Then I've got to deal with my 2 here. So I divide by 2. Can't divide this one by 2, so that 2's got to go out front. So here I have t minus 3, and then I have 2t plus 3. Now, all of that is equal to 0. So now I solve. So I'm going to have two solutions here. So, and we talked about that already up at the top. So I take t minus 3 equal to 0, and I work it out. So how do I do that? Well, remember what we said. The factor and the 0 are always going to be opposites. So t equals 3. I could do the same here. We talked about this before. What's the opposite of 3? Negative 3. What's the opposite of multiply by 2? Divide by 2. But in this case, that does not work because we said t is time here. You can't have a negative time. So in this problem, it's 3 seconds. Now, because my positive answer was an exact integer, I could have found this one on the table. So I could have used the table here to find this one, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you might get the positive answer that is a fraction or decimal. So in that case, you would have to do it graphically like we referred to earlier. So we'll work into the homework section here online and do these problems.